Want to get back to Evita Duffy here because Evita, this piece you wrote in the Federalist, I read it word for word the other day when you had posted it. I sent it around to a bunch of people, and I actually had no idea that this was part of your family background. That you were directly tied. You had family members that lived through the Spanish Civil War. Walk us through this.
So the Spanish Civil War was fought between 1936 and 1939, but it was really sparked by the persecution of Catholics in the lead up to the war. So the government, the republic, so they called it, in Spain was run by communists, by radical leftists, really influenced by Stalinism during that time period, and they started off their persecution of Catholics by banning crucifixes in the classroom, then banning Catholic schools, then saying that marriage that was done with the Catholic Church was no longer valid in the eyes of the state, and then it really escalated to much greater, heights. They actually started to murder Catholic monks, nuns, bishops, priests. My family lived through the Spanish Civil War, and they were targets of communist aggression because they were Spanish intellectuals. They were upper class, middle class, but also they were Catholic writers. And my great-grandfather was in prison during the war. The men he was imprisoned with ended up being murdered by the communists. My great-grandparents were separated for years until the war was over. And I had an extended family member who was actually a priest who ended up being captured by the communists. He was going to be shot in a firing squad, but they ended up grazing his arm. And when they grazed his arm, he begged them to actually kill him. And instead, the executioners buried him alive. And there are so many stories like this, and that people have in other parts of the world too, right? I mean, there was a similar persecution of religious people in Soviet Russia. And so to me, as somebody who has this family history and who was taught the communist version in high school, which was infuriating, and I really bothered me that my classmates were only getting one side of the story, it really makes us, it is a good way to contextualize what we're going through right now, because we're seeing with the FBI a very similar persecution of religious people, but specifically Catholics. And it always starts with Catholics. It really does. And that should send up smoke signals to everyone that we need to have, we need to be on alert. We need to be rebuking any kind of persecution of Catholics or discrimination, whether that be, at the Dodgers game, or with members of Congress appointing people to the Supreme Court or other higher offices. We really need to be keeping this in check and being aware of it.
No, I was proud to have actually been there at that Dodgers game. Evita, this story that your family experienced, and tell us a little bit, by the way, this side of the Spanish Civil War that you're talking about, the Catholic side, the nationalist side, the side that won, by the way, is never brought up in U.S. classrooms. It's not something that I learned about until I started reading books much later in life, way beyond high school, college, etc. Mystery Grove Publishing House has some good books on it. But what is the narrative that we get told, or that most Americans get told in high school about the Spanish Civil War?
So usually in history, we hear the side of the victor, right? That's usually how it goes, but not with the Spanish Civil War. And I think the reason is because a lot of Americans were actually involved in the Spanish Civil War. There was a lot of sort of communist intellectuals, artists, poets who left
Hemingway.
America to join the communists and fight on their side, and some of them even died, but they brought those stories back to the United States and really dominated the narrative around the Spanish Civil War in college and high school classrooms. But this is also something that we see all the time, right? It's not just the Spanish Civil War. It's almost every single aspect of American and global history where there is an overemphasis on condemning right-wing governments, right? And ignoring or belittling the atrocities that were committed by communists in the previous century. And this is what leftists do, right? To make sure that in the future we are desensitized to similar communist and socialist policies in the United States.
And it really is amazing, because the level of atrocities that were committed by the communists not only was absolutely horrific. I actually spoke about this briefly at at the LA Dodger prayer rally when I gave a speech prior to it, along with Bishop Strickland and others, and I talked about how it was nuns. Nuns were raped on the altar in churches, priests forced to watch, then all of them would be lined up and shot, or as you mentioned, your family member ended up being buried even though he wasn't dead. The sheer level of the horrors that is spoken of is never, you can't find this in any Hollywood movie. By the way, the same is true for any communist revolution. Hollywood will not make movies of this. Whether it's we've focused on China a lot here on the program, but you could talk about the Bolshevik Revolution. You could talk about Spanish Revolution, the French Revolution, which is sort of a proto-Marxist revolution, if you actually look at it that way, extremely, extremely anti-Catholic, smashing the statues in Notre Dame, converting all of Notre Dame into this temple to reason and enlightenment, etc. And again, priests killed, nuns ravaged, again and again, over at Mexico many times. But with the Spanish Civil War particularly, we never get told in these terms that it was actually the communists. And at the time, the international, so the Comintern, which was the International Communist Syndicate headed out of Moscow, because that's, of course, where the communists got their first foothold. So now they've got the power of the state. What people don't understand, Evita, is that when the communist revolution started in Spain, it didn't start militarily from the ground up. They actually took over the state first. Walk us through how the communists were able to do that in Spain.
Right. I mean, so they overthrew their monarch, and there was sort of a vacuum, and they were able to sort of get their way in multiple factions of government, right? And they knew, and this is what's actually happening in the United States, right? They knew that if they wanted to create a communist state, the best way is not, collective, community organizing and grassroots, sort of action. It was really to take over the highest levels of government and to do it top down, which we see reflected in our own country today. And part of the problem when we talk about the way that this story and so many others have been repurposed to make the leftists look really good in American education is that we're talking about now generations of misinformation, really. Because when I was in my class learning about this and pointed out, hey, this isn't the real story. I don't know why we're only learning about the supposed Republicans. They weren't interested in the Republic. They were full-fledged communists. This was not, and so many people were hurt by this, including my own family. And when I pointed that out to the teacher, she didn't know. She didn't know the other story because she was only taught one side. And so part of when we talk about how do we fix our education system, we have to start with the teachers' colleges, to be honest. I mean, that's where a lot of the radicalization is happening. And then it's trickling down from the college level all the way down to now elementary school with social emotional learning and other ways of injecting ideology into students who really, there can't be a free marketplace of ideas with 5-year-olds, right? And so it was very purposeful, and it's now very deep-seated. And we have to really look at the root cause of all of these things before we can say banning LGBTQ explicit books in high school, because it's so much more than that, and it's going to take so much more than that.
And I really appreciate you saying that, because there's this sort of mentality on the right that if we unplug from the institutions and we just go run off and raise chickens, that's not a Tim Pool reference, everything will be fine and we can go off. But you know what the left does? They indoctrinate teachers. They go to teaching schools. They go to journalism schools. They go to law school. They become the judges. They become the ones who control the institutions. They become the teachers. They become the academics. So the rest of us, we're out sitting there saying, okay, you know what, we can live with our families in peace. Yeah. Until they come for you. And here's the thing, folks, with the internet, and just like any abusive person in a relationship, right? They will never let the other one leave. They will always go after them. Evita Duffy, 1 minute left. Where can people go to read this incredible story and to follow you in your works?
So it's at thefederalist.com. You can find it in the latest section or just under my byline, Evita Duffy. And then my Twitter is Evita Duffy _1. What
a horrifying story. I hope I would love, by the way, just straight up pitching you here. It sounds like, if you've got it in you, this would be easily turned into a book, documentary, podcast series. It sounds like there's a lot more to just this one story. And I think that people need to actually know the truth of the Spanish Civil War, possibly more so than others, because that may be the one that we are closestly following a parallel to. Thank you so much, Evita.
Thank you.